What's up everyone, I'm Jacob, also known as Jonesy, and I've just broke the indie trading card game Nostalgix. How? By building the game's first stupidly ridiculous combo deck, which can draw every single card in the deck as early as turn 3. This is Shiiga Turbo Draw. But before I jump into the deck tech, if you have not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified every time I put out a new video, because I will be putting out more Nostalgix content. Now let's jump into the deck tech. So, starting off, the hero in this deck is the namesake Shiiga the Destroyer. He is the Void Rare only hero from the base set of Nostalgix, but you can also find this version of him from Secret Shard 7. Once per turn, Shiiga lets you pay 1 mana to return any card from your Void to the bottom of your deck. Now, normally this is not super useful, but when we combo off, we will draw through our entire deck until we have 0 cards left. Which means, as long as we save a draw spell in our hand, we can use Shiiga to return a Voidcast or any other card we want, and then immediately draw it. Now, in order for us to play all of our draw spells, we're going to need permanent mana, and the card which gives us that is Wish Upon a Frog. We're playing 4 copies of this 3 mana spell, and Wish Upon a Frog gives you 1 permanent mana crystal, which means that every time you use that mana crystal to play a card, it immediately refills right after you play it. And because all of our draw spells cost 3 or less mana, if we can play 3 Wish Upon a Frogs, we will be able to draw through our entire deck just by playing draw spells over and over and over again. Now, trying to get to 3 copies of a single card in a 50 card deck is very difficult to do, but we actually only need 2 copies of Wish Upon a Frog because we're also playing 4 copies of the Arena New Game Plus. This is a 3 mana arena which causes all fighters' attacks deal 2 more damage, which does hurt us, but it also makes all spells, equipment, and surprises cost 1 less to play. Which means once we play this, we only need 2 copies of Wish Upon a Frog. And it also means that on turn 3, once we have 3 mana, if we play New Game Plus, then on turn 4, we will be able to play both copies of Wish Upon a Frog to have a turn 4 win. But we actually have another card which can make us win on turn 3. And that is Fast Forward. This is a 1 mana spell which causes each player to increase the current max mana by 1. We're playing 4 copies of this because Fast Forward will let us play a New Game Plus on turn 2, and then 2 Wish Upon a Frogs on turn 3 for the turn 3 win. Now, this is not going to happen every game, but with Fast Forward, it makes winning by turn 5 very consistent for us. So, those are the mana enablers. Now, we need to talk about the draw spells, since there are a lot of them. First off, we're playing 4 copies of Alternate Timeline. This is a 1 mana spell which lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, you draw 1, and you void the other. This is one of the best draw spells in the entire deck because you get to look at the top 2 cards of your deck while only costing 1 mana. Once you play 1 Wish Upon a Frog or a New Game Plus, you will be able to play as many of these as you have in hand. And the fact that we have to void 1 card from our deck, it's not actually necessarily a bad thing either, because we will be able to void any extra copies of Fast Forward or New Game Plus or any of our 1-ofs which you don't actually need in the current moment. The next draw spell is Payoff. We're playing 4 copies of this 1 mana spell. It lets you draw 1 card and then you restore 5 health to your opponent's hero. Now, restoring 5 health to your opponent's hero sounds like a big downside, but it actually is not, because restoring health cannot increase the target's max health, which means if our opponent's hero is already at max health, this is just pay 1 mana to draw a card. Plus, even if our opponent is at max health, we're still going to be able to kill them with our combo finish. Next up, we have 4 copies of Crowd Surf. This is a 2 mana spell, which causes you to void 2 cards from the top of your deck, and then you draw 1. Now, while Crowd Surf can mill cards like extra copies of Wish Upon a Frog that we need to combo off, we do have some spells which I'll show later on which can actually return cards from our void to our hand. And for only 2 mana, this does get us through 3 cards in our deck. Next up, we have 3 copies of Energy Drink. This is a 2 mana spell which gives target fighter charge, and you draw a card. Because we're not playing any fighters ourselves in this deck, that was one of the challenges I imposed myself when building this deck. We can only target our opponent's fighters with this card. However, virtually every other deck in Nostalgix is playing fighters, so it probably won't be a problem. The only time where it will be a problem is if we end up playing a Divine Wrath to destroy all of our opponent's fighters. That is why we're only playing 3 copies, in case we do need to Wrath the board. Next up, we have what is quite possibly the best draw spell in the deck, Frog of Greed. we're playing 4 copies of this 3-mana spell, which lets you draw 2 cards. This is our only draw spell, which actually nets us cards in hand, because we draw 2 at the cost of only 1 card in hand. Every other draw spell is actually even, so Frog of Greed is going to be really important for drawing extra cards and making sure we don't brick as we combo off. The last draw spell in the deck is Massive Effect. We are playing 4 copies of this. It's a 3-mana spell which lets you draw 3 cards and then discard 2. Massive Effect is also one of the other very important cards because you get to draw 3, and you can always discard 2 extra copies of Fast Forward, which you don't actually need the turn you're comboing off, or extra copies of New Game Plus. So I've shown you the mana enablers and the draw spells, but what do you do once you draw through your entire deck? Well, as long as we have a New Game Plus out, and we play 4 copies of Wish Upon a Frog, then all of our 5-mana spells are effectively free, which means we can start playing Voidcast. We are playing 4 copies of Voidcast, and for 5 mana, it lets you play any spell from your Void at no additional cost. And the main target in order to win the game is Gamatron Slice. We're playing 1 copy of this 7-mana spell. It deals damage to anything equal to half the total number of cards in all players' voids, rounded down. Now once we do draw through our deck, we are almost guaranteed to have at least 40 cards in our void, which means we only have to play Gamatron Slice twice in order to win. And even if our opponent has a couple nopes, there are going to be a lot of situations where you still have all 4 copies of Voidcast in your hand by the time you draw through your entire deck, which means you can likely cast Gamatron Slice more than 2 times. Now, just in case we can't cast Voidcast more than 2 times, we do have some cards that can return cards from our Void to our hand. One of them is Unyeet. We are playing 1 copy of this 1-mana spell. You discard 2 cards when you play it, and you search your Void for any card and put it back into your hand. The fact that we have to discard 2 cards with Unyeet is a downside in most situations. However, there are some corner cases where we need to use Unyeet to discard some cards in our hand on purpose in order to fill up our Void, in case we actually have less than 40 cards in our Void. Now, the other return card is Rewind Time. We are playing 3 copies of Rewind Time. It is a 3-mana spell, which lets you choose one of your voided spells, surprises, or equipment and put it back into your hand. Rewind Time is going to be better than Unyeet in most situations, however, this cannot actually return New Game Plus. So we have the one of Unyeet just to return New Game Plus or to discard cards from our hand to fill up our void more. Lastly, we have some random utility cards which we can play just in case we need to survive in an emergency situation. First off, we have Divine Blessing. We're playing 1 copy of this 3-mana spell, which restores 5 health to anything. If our opponent has a very fast start, we need to gain just a little bit of health in order to stay in the game. Divine Blessing will do that. Plus, it pairs very well with Save the Day, which actually causes you to lose 5 health. Next up, we have 2 copies of Divine Wrath. This is an 8-mana spell which voids all fighters in play. And even though neither player takes prize counters, we're not going to win by taking prize counters from our opponent. We're going to win by Gamatron slicing their face multiple times. So if our opponent does have a very fast start, we can always Voidcast into Divine Wrath after we discard it with an alternate timeline or a Massive Effect. Lastly, we have individual copies of 3 different surprises. We have Nope, a 3-mana surprise which can counter and negate a spell from our opponent. We have 1 copy of Reverse. Reverse negates a surprise and gives the owner of that surprise an extra draw, which can help out our opponent. However, if we're playing this and using it on the turn we're comboing off, our opponent's extra draw does not actually matter. And lastly, we're playing 1 copy of Save the Day. Save the Day for 3 mana lets you negate a fighter by paying 5 of your hero's health, and also negates any effects that playing the fighter would have. Alright, so that's the main deck. Now onto the 10-card sideboard. First off, we're playing 2 copies of Towerfall. This is a 6-mana spell, which deals damage to all of your opponent's fighters equal to their hand size, and you draw 2 cards. There are a lot of token decks in Nostalgix, and with the release of Harmonic Surge, there are even more. So this is primarily sideboarded in, and we need to make sure we have some extra sweepers to take out all of our opponent's tokens, because New Game Plus will actually give the attack of tokens 2 extra damage as well. Next up, we are playing 2 copies of Chain Lightning. This is a 3-mana spell which deals 3 damage to a fighter and 1 damage to each fighter adjacent to it. I'm playing 2 copies of this for one reason alone: Unlucky Frog. Unlucky Frog deals 1 damage to each player every time they draw an extra card besides the first card they draw each turn, which means that one Unlucky Frog could potentially just kill us off. And because I don't want to just rely on Divine Wrath to kill an Unlucky Frog, I have these 2 Chain Lightnings. Next up, we have some more surprises just in case. I have a second copy of Reverse, a second copy of Nope, in case our opponent is also going to try to play Gamatron Slice against ourselves. And we also have 2 copies of Laser Barrier. This is a 5-mana surprise which negates an attack and prevents all of your opponent's other fighters from attacking. Plus, every single card that they play for the rest of the turn costs 1 more mana to play. Laser Barrier may only buy us 1 turn, but there are a lot of situations where we only need 1 more turn in order to win. Lastly, we have 2 copies of Frog of Duality. This is a 3-mana spell which lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You add 1 to your hand to put the other 2 back to the bottom of your deck in any order. Now, ideally, I want to have Frog of Duality in my main deck, but I felt like it would be better to have some different 2-mana draw spells rather than clog up with too many 3-mana cards, since I do have a lot of them in the main deck already. I still put 2 copies of this card in the sideboard just in case I went up against the mirror match. We can board out our 2 Divine Wraths and put in these instead. So that is Shiiga Turbo Draw. I will be playing this deck in a webcam tournament on the Nostalgix Discord, and will be recording and uploading all of my matches that I play in that tournament, so stay tuned for those. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.